Well guys, I screwed up. I measured my wheelbase and my wheelbase is at 123 inches. But I don't know, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. Word salad, word salad. Anyway. Wow. All right, well, good morning. So, we're up to video number 21. Wow, episode 21. So last weekend, you guys saw, or last video I guess it would be, you guys saw I did a bunch of figuring on the front axle, got it flexed out, drooped out, checked pinion angles, checked clearances, and I think I'm good with where we're at. You can only go so far with the parts you have. At this point, what I need now are shocks. I need shocks for the front to see exactly how much droop I'm going to get and what my actual suspension travel is going to be. I decided to disconnect that front axle, flip the chassis around, and check pinion angles on the rear axle through the suspension cycle. What I found is right now the pinion changes about 2.5 or 2.7 degree from full bump to what I think will be full droop. Again, this is speculation because in order to know what your actual travel numbers are, bump to droop, especially that droop, you're going to have your shocks at least mocked up, because your shocks are going to tell you what your travel is going to be. They're the driving force behind your limits, upper limit, lower limit. The other thing I wanted to do was see sort of what my drive shaft was going to do. And these are all working, moving parts that you sort of need to mock up and have in place, and keep in mind that you're going to need your drive shaft angles to be happy, because your U-joints can only take so much working angle. I went ahead and did this off camera. I've got this sort of figured out. I think it's going to work the way I want it. 2.5 degree of pinion change is not a whole lot. I can still adjust that. Remember, everything here is still just tacked in place. It's not permanent. I think we're good for now. I think what I want to do is sort of reorganize the shop again. I've got stuff everywhere. I pulled the engine out. I've got limited space, so I need to reorganize everything. And I think what I'm going to do is pull the axle off again, rotate the chassis back around where it was, put it back on the chassis table lengthwise, and then I'm going to reinstall the front axle, reinstall the rear axle, and I want to double check some measurements, particularly wheelbase, and see where I'm at ride height, make sure I'm hitting my marks there. If I'm hitting my marks there, I'm going to go ahead and finish building out the front end. I'm going to work on getting the hood section done with our rolled and radius tubing, work on getting the nose done, the front bumper, the area where our winch is going to mount, and then I think after that, what I can do is I can actually pull this thing off the chassis table, mock up shocks. I've got my rear shocks already. I don't have front shocks yet, so that's going to be the next purchase that I need to make. Anyway, then after that, I think I can pull this thing off the table and really start articulating suspension with tires on and seeing where I'm at. Clearance wise, I have a feeling this rear axle is not going to be wide enough. I just got a feeling there. Once I strap up tires to it and I articulate it out, I have a feeling that tires are going to be in contact here. I don't know. It's intuition. I don't know. I'm a little bit concerned about that, and I can't really check that on the chassis table. I need to have it down at ride height, the belly down at ride height. My chassis table is 19 inches off the floor. And I think my target ride height with 40-inch tires is going to be an 18-inch belly height. In hindsight, the chassis table should have been built at that 18-inch ride height, or I should have made it adjustable to where I could adjust the table height on the chassis table. which is still doable. I can still do it. It's just going to take a little bit of effort. The thing is like a race car or a 4800 style race car, it's most likely going to have a lower target belly height at your normal ride height than, say, a rock crawler. A rock crawler is going to be in that 19, 20 inch range, maybe. It just all depends on how you're building. These are all variables that you sort of have to think about when you're building out a chassis like this. The other thing I've been thinking about is once I get this to a point where I feel comfortable pulling it off the chassis table, starting to get stuff final welded, I'm probably going to relocate the chassis table, and it would be kind of handy if I could take the chassis table itself and put it on the car lift behind me and stick it up there out of the way, just raise it up out of the way. That way I have all this area in front of the rock crawler free to work around. That's something else I've been sort of considering. It would make it a lot easier to articulate the suspension, check and test things, set up my shocks, things like that. So the build itself is sort of evolving into, I think at this point, I might try to finish out this build and make it complete. I really feel like I want to go fast, and I feel like if I build this thing out, I'll have a better idea of, it's going to just educate me and make me more of a complete builder, because up until this point, really all I've got experience with is rock crawling, trail wheeling, extreme rock crawling at that with the trail buggy. But I do want to try to go fast. I want to see what that's like. I've been talking to Kevin quite a bit, talking about his race program, talking about how maybe I could fit into that as a support guy. I don't really know yet. We haven't really made any final decisions. I do know that it's a budgetary thing. Obviously, building a car out complete, it's going to cost quite a bit of money in parts. But I think that's what I want to do, and I want to try to sort of steer this build in that direction. This thing's going to be continually for sale after I get it sort of to a roller stage, but I don't know. I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. Word salad, word salad. Anyway, so that's where we're at. I think I'm going to get things a little bit organized around here. I need to free up the engine hoist so that I can lift the front axle up. Lifting the front axle up by hand or with the jacks and trying to get it up on these jack stands is dangerous, especially with the third member in there and the outer's all bolted on. Enough of my rambling. I'm going to start getting things ready to go. We'll get this rear axle off, yada, yada, yada. Here we go. All right.
So close, can't deny. Shut my eyes, love is blind. I don't need you to know all the way down in the hole. You push me out of control when the lights are out your mind. I fell out of my mind. Got too close, can't deny. Where have you been all my life? It's a sin, love is blind. What you do, how'd you get so pretty? Are you leaving? Are you leaving? I don't need you to know
Well, guys, it's time for a confession. I screwed up. As much as I hate to admit it, I got everything set up at, this is sort of what ride height would be. The links would be about this level. They're a little bit off, the tires are a little bit off the ground because of the chassis table. The chassis needs to go down at least another inch, probably inch and a half. I've got shims underneath the chassis to level it up. So you guys saw on the time lapse, I measured my wheelbase, and my wheelbase is at 123 inches, 123 and a half, somewhere in there. I don't know how I did that. I think, in hindsight, I think it's because I should have set up the front end first. However, I didn't set up the front end because I didn't have all the parts I needed to set up the front end, so I went ahead and set up the rear forelink. So, I'm shooting for a 119 inch wheelbase, so I need to chop about 4 inches out of this thing, somewhere in there, or your wheelbase is going to change throughout the suspension cycle. Because of the way this thing is set up with the suspension neutral or right at ride height, maybe just slightly lower than ride height, that is going to be the longest your wheelbase will be. As it cycles downward, it's going to narrow up some. As it cycles upward, it's going to narrow up some because of the arc or the plane and the arc that the links sort of travel on. So if you picture it, it just kind of goes up, curves in, curves down at the bottom. And, you know, the way this thing's set up, right at ride height, it's about the longest it's going to be. You know, we're talking wheelbase. So, yeah, it's a little bit discouraging. I'm not real happy about that, but live and learn. You guys maybe you'll learn from this. I don't want to shorten up stuff in the front because I've got all my clearances set with my turning radius or my steering angle and the distance between the back of the tire here and the rocker tube here. If I shorten up the front at all, it's going to start messing with that. It's going to start messing with my clearances for my drive shaft. So I don't want to take anything out of the front. Theoretically, I could take a little bit out of the front. However, I measured my lower links on the front. My lower links on the front are about 38 link length from bolt to bolt. Lower links on the rear are about 43 link length from bolt to bolt. So this is where I need to take that length out of. This is where I need to take the wheelbase length out of. I need to bring this rear axle forward, which, you know, is a domino effect because I've already sort of got this back end set up. However, this is only tacked in. This is only tacked in. This is only tacked in. Like, all this stuff is only tacked in, and that's why we only tack stuff in. The only thing that's not tacked in is this joint right here. And I sort of put a long bead on there because I wanted this to be stable because I knew I was going to be moving the chassis around. But this is probably where I'm going to need to take the length out of anyway because I've got plenty of room. The way it's set up, I've got plenty of room with the fuel cell. There's lots of room behind the rear X-brace here, or the rear firewall, whatever you want to call it, to the fuel cell. So if I take this joint and cut it up this way more, slide the fuel cell forward, I've got plenty of room to do that. Dimensions behind the fuel cell are still going to remain the same. Spare tire area is still going to remain the same. It's just everything's going to be moved up. Now in doing that, I might have to redo these joints right here where the C-pillar comes down, but it is what it is. It's 123.5 inch wheelbase is way too long. I think I'm pushing it at 119. I think some of the cars that are racing right now are 117 max. There might be a few out there that are a little bit longer, but I was shooting for 119 because I used to run 119 inch wheelbase on this rig, and it did really well in the rocks. So I don't really want to go much shorter than 119 because 119 at speed is the advantage. The longer wheelbase is the advantage at speed in the desert, but the longer wheelbase is the disadvantage in the rocks. While 123 would probably be excellent for high speed desert stuff, it's gonna suck in the rocks. You could probably make it work, but it's just too long. Breakover angle, be belting out. So yeah, being totally transparent with you guys, I'm human. I screwed up. I got a little excited and built up this 4-link. But That's the reason why we mock things up. That's the reason why we cycle suspension. That's the reason why we check, double check, triple check. And that's the reason why we think 3 or 4 steps ahead. Obviously I should have set up this front end first. In theory, I could take a little bit out of the front end too. Again, mock up. These links are all temporary links. This is 120 wall, 1 3/4 inch. The bungs for the heims are only tacked in. So I can shorten these links up, move this axle forward, and sort of go from there. Build the back end again around it. I want to have this joint pretty much centered over the top of the axle. So that's where that cut in there, that miter, is going to move forward. So it's going to take some work. Yeah, I'm redoing what I started, but what I've already done. It is what it is. That's the facts of it. So anyway, here we go. Let's get after it. All right, well, took a little doing. I took 2 inches out of the lowers, 1.5 inches out of the uppers in the rear. I brought the wheelbase into about 120.5 inches. I think I can go a little bit more. What I'm looking at is the relation of the front of the tire to where the rocker tube sweeps back into the main frame rail. There to the relation of the front of the tire here. I'm gonna put the front end up at full bump. You can see I got that front end tube on there so I can kind of picture the way things are. Standing back here, it's really obvious that I'm gonna have to bring that tail section in. I don't like that hanging out there quite as much. It's not gonna be difficult to do that. It's just gonna take time. I still think that I want to take at least another inch out of it. I think 119 and a half is good. I'm gonna measure this thing at full bump and see what it's at. It's gonna shrink up some. I'm just really curious to see. It's really hard to, you probably saw in the time lapse, it's really hard to measure wheelbase without being able to clamp the tape measure on there somehow or something. The other thing I was looking at is this rear axle. Yes, I could make it work at the current width. I've got some wheel spacers on these old Toyota axles. I might pull these front wheel spacers. I think they're 1.5 inches. I might pull that and just bump this out a little bit and see what it looks like. I think I would rather have a little bit more width here on this rear axle. Despite all the trouble I went through with this axle, I don't know. I'd like to have a little bit more width. So we'll see. Just thinking out loud. With this thing fully flexed out, that end drooped out, this tire is going to end up coming up in here. And the more width I have this way, the less of the tire, the less of the contact area I have. So this radius in here is not going to change. You know, this is going to come in some, but this right here, this clearance, this radius is not going to change. So just things to think about. I would rather bring this lower tail section inward or forward. So like I said, this bend is sort of up over that axle more, and this cross tube will in turn go forward, which will give me more up travel too. So it's a net positive in a lot of different ways. It's just time. It's just time, but that's all right. We want to do it right, and we want to make it look right, and we want to make it perform right. So that's why we're doing all this. I could maybe take maybe an inch out of the front end on the front links and bring them back a little bit, but I don't want to crowd everything in the front end. What I am concerned about is everything looking balanced. I want the front end to look balanced with the back end. I don't want there to be too much of a nose section versus too much of a tail section. I want everything to look balanced. With the amount of steering and everything on this front end, I think it wouldn't. Right now we're safe. We're safe with everything as far as lengths, clearances, everything. We're safe. I could make it interesting by bringing the front axle back a little bit, but I'm not sure I want to do that.